sound of the shovel digging into my land was the last straw. I walked over, ready to confront them, and saw a group of workers from the HOA digging up my property without asking. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. They froze eyes wide like they didn't realize the mistake they'd just made. But it wasn't just a mistake, it was a full-blown invasion. As I stood there watching them scramble, I knew one thing for sure: they had no idea who they were messing with. Little did they know, they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And it was going to cost them. Karen, the HOA president, wasn't your typical neighborhood busybody. She was more like the queen of Cedar Creek Estates, and the community's rules were her royal decree. Dressed to the nines, clipboard always in hand, she ran the neighborhood with an iron fist. No one questioned her authority. When she marched onto my property that day, all high and mighty, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. With a smile that was as fake as her community spirit, she tried to play it cool. "Derek," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "there seems to be a misunderstanding. The new waterline route was approved. It's for the clubhouse, and it's in everyone's best interest." Her eyes scanned me like I was just another obstacle to move. But I wasn't backing down. I pointed to my land, my property, and told her straight up, "This isn't your land, Karen." She stiffened that little smile, faltering for a second before she quickly recovered. "Derek, let's not make this difficult. We're already in construction, and changing things now would be too expensive." And there it was, the typical HOA attitude. She didn't care about the inconvenience, the trespassing, or the violation. She just wanted to bulldoze through it. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I never expected to be the kind of person who clashed with an HOA. When I bought my ranch just outside Cedar Creek Estates, I figured I'd have the peace and quiet I'd been craving. 10 acres of land, the freedom to do what I wanted, and no one to bother me. The suburban sprawl of Cedar Creek looked like something out of a picture-perfect magazine. Immaculate lawns, freshly painted fences, and neighbors who all seemed to live in a perfectly choreographed dance of conformity. And as long as I stayed out of their way, I figured they'd leave me alone. But that was before the HOA set their sights on me. It started with small things: a note on my gate about the color of my barn, a reminder that my gravel driveway didn't meet the community guidelines. Then there was the letter about my horses making too much noise after 9 p.m. It was ridiculous. I wasn't even a member of the HOA. My property wasn't even within the boundaries, but somehow they acted like I was part of their little kingdom. At first I ignored it. I didn't want to stir the pot. I figured I'd just keep my head down, do my thing, and let them have their little rules. But then came the day everything changed. I was working around the ranch when I noticed a group of construction workers pulling up right next to my property line. I was about to ask them what was going on when I saw they were digging on my land. I marched over, hands on my hips, and demanded answers. One of the workers looked uncomfortable flipping through papers on his clipboard. "The HOA approved this route for a new water line," he said nervously. I didn't hesitate. "You're digging on private property," I shot back. His face turned pale. That's when I knew this wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was the HOA trying to steal from me, and they picked the wrong guy to mess with. The first few weeks after the diggers showed up were the calm before the storm. But the HOA wasn't done with me just yet. I started getting letters, not so friendly reminders about things that didn't quite fit their idea of neighborhood standards. The first came right after I confronted the workers. "Your driveway's too rough, Mr. Derek. It doesn't align with community aesthetics," they wrote. Another letter followed this time about the fence that bordered my property. Apparently the wood I used wasn't treated to their liking. All of this for a guy who didn't even belong to their HOA. I figured it was just the usual stuff, poking and prodding. I tossed the letters in the trash. It wasn't until the next one came that I started to feel the real heat. This time they had the audacity to call in a community inspection without my consent. They were sending someone over to assess my property, for what I had no idea. But I wasn't about to let them walk all over me either. 2 weeks later, things took a turn. One afternoon I was fixing a gate on my barn when I noticed something strange: 2 men in HOA polo shirts standing by my fence taking pictures. My heart sank. One of them was pointing at my land with a serious look on his face, scribbling something down on a notepad. I walked over, and the man quickly shoved the notepad into his back pocket. "What's going on here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though I could feel the tension rising. "Oh, just routine inspection," one of them said, avoiding eye contact. "Routine inspection," I repeated, frowning. "What are you taking photos now?" he stammered, a little glancing nervously at his partner. "Well, there's been some concern about your property. HOA board wants to make sure everything's up to code." I crossed my arms, looking them over. "You're standing on my land without my permission. How about you get off it before I call the cops? They started packing up, but the damage was done. This was no longer just about a pipeline. They were trying to mark my land, claiming it as theirs. The next time I saw them, they weren't just taking photos. The construction crew came back under the cover of darkness, and this time they didn't just trespass. They dug a trench and laid down part of the PVC pipeline. My blood boiled when I saw the freshly disturbed soil the next morning. I could barely wrap my head around what they'd done. Without asking, without warning, they had buried a water pipeline across my land. No permission, no consultation. They didn't even have the decency to tell me. I stood there staring at the trench, my mind racing. The HOA president, Karen, had crossed a line. This wasn't just harassment anymore. They were taking my property. I grabbed my phone and called Jack, a friend who worked as a land surveyor. "Jack, I need you to check my property line," I said. "I think they've gone too far." Jack was there the next day, and when he pulled the official records, he confirmed my worst fears. The HOA had gone another 60 feet past my property line, right into my land. It wasn't just a violation, it was a theft. I could feel the rage building inside me. I wasn't going to let this slide. I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board and the water department, but I knew Karen wouldn't take it lying down. A week later, the HOA got a notice from the county. They were in violation of private property law and were required to remove the pipeline immediately. I could already picture Karen's red face when she read the letter. Sure enough, she showed up at my gate, storming up my gravel driveway, her face flushed with fury. "This is ridiculous," she yelled. "Do you know how much money we've spent on this project? This is essential for the community." I crossed my arms, keeping my voice steady. "You should have asked before you started digging on my property." She glared at me, trying to deflect. "This is about the greater good. The entire community depends on this water line." I shook my head. "Well, next time ask before you dig. You're on my land without permission, Karen. Now, either you fix it or I'll call the sheriff." Her eyes narrowed. "You won't get away with this." I didn't say anything. She wasn't in control anymore. Not of my land and not of this situation. It was like they didn't learn their lesson. A few weeks later, I overheard some of the neighbors talking about the HOA's next move. Apparently they were trying to claim my land through eminent domain, arguing it was essential for community infrastructure. I couldn't believe it. They were trying to steal my property, plain and simple. They didn't think I'd fight back, but I wasn't the kind of guy to let this slide. That's when I got the call from Jack again. "Derek," he said, "you're not going to believe this, but the HOA's water source, the one they're so desperate to connect to, it's up for sale. It's being sold by the previous owner of the well system in the hills." That's when it hit me. If they wanted to play games with my land, I'd play too. I made a call to Bill, the property owner. A few days later, I signed the papers. I now owned the water source that fed the HOA. A few days after that, I turned off the water valve feeding their pipeline, and the chaos began. The sprinklers stopped. The pool drained halfway. I could almost hear Karen screaming on the other end of the phone when she called me. "You can't do this," she shouted. "Oh, I can," I replied, a smile creeping onto my face. And I just did. The moment I stepped into that HOA emergency meeting, I could feel the tension in the air. Karen was standing at the front trying to hold it together, but her fingers were trembling slightly as she gripped the microphone. The room was full of frustrated homeowners, most of them fidgeting in their seats, glancing nervously between Karen and me. She wasn't used to people staring her down, and I wasn't about to make it easy for her. "Derek," she started, her voice tight, "we have a community-wide crisis. The water supply's been cut off, and we need your help." She tried to sound calm, but there was an edge to her tone, a desperation she couldn't hide. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, a grin forming on my face. "I'm not sure what you're asking for, Karen. I don't owe this community anything." Karen's eyes darted to the others, but there was no going back now. The room was quiet, all eyes on me. We need access to the water, Derek. We'll pay you for it. We'll make it right." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? After you trespassed on my land? After you tried to take what was mine without asking?" I could see the sweat starting to form on Karen's brow as the words hung in the air. But it wasn't over. I wasn't about to make this easy for her. "Here's the deal," I said, standing up and reaching into my bag. I pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I've got the deed, Karen. The property records. The water supply contract from Bill. The whole thing. You know, the one that shows the HOA has no legal right to this water anymore." The room went silent. The homeowners leaned forward, looking at the papers. Karen's face drained of color as I passed the documents to the man sitting closest to me. He glanced through them quickly, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Weren't expecting that, were you?" I added with a smirk. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. This whole thing is illegal, Karen, I continued. I own the well, I own the pipeline, and unless you want a lawsuit, I suggest you start thinking of another way to fix this. You've dug yourself a hole this time. Karen opened her mouth again, but she was speechless. The truth had hit her like a ton of bricks, and there was no way out. The room buzzed with murmurs as the reality of what I had just revealed sank in. People were whispering, staring at Karen with disbelief. For the first time in her life, Karen wasn't the one in control. She tried to gather herself, but the damage was already done. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice shaking with fury. You can't just shut down our water supply. The entire neighborhood depends on it." "Oh, I'm sure they do," I said, leaning in, making sure every word landed. "But you should have thought of that before you stole from me. You don't get to take what's mine just because you think you're entitled to it." She flushed red, glancing nervously around the room. The other homeowners had seen enough. They were done with her. Someone from the back of the room spoke up. "Karen, this isn't working. You've made a mess of this. It's over." The room fell into an awkward silence. Karen's gaze flicked around, desperate for support, but no one was on her side anymore. This wasn't just about water anymore. It was about trust, and she had lost it. With her back against the wall, she turned to me, eyes blazing. "Fine," she said, her voice low and filled with venom. "We'll make a deal. You'll get paid for the water, but we're not going to forget this." "Oh, I know," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "You'll be paying for a long time. And you'll never forget how I turned the tables on you." She was defeated. There was no coming back from this. The HOA had no leverage, and Karen had nothing left but her pride, which was quickly crumbling. As the meeting drew to a close, I knew one thing for sure: Karen's reign was over. The community saw her for what she really was, a tyrant who had crossed the line one too many times. The days following the HOA meeting were surreal. I couldn't believe it was finally over. At least I told myself it was. But when I stepped out of my front door, I saw something I hadn't expected. The entire neighborhood seemed different. The lawns weren't as pristine as they once were. The community wasn't buzzing with gossip about who did what to whose yard. It was peaceful. In a strange way, I felt like I'd taken the weight off the community's shoulders. They had been living under Karen's thumb for years, quietly afraid to speak out or make waves. Now the tension had lifted, and for the first time the people of Cedar Creek Estates had a chance to breathe. Even my neighbors, the ones who had whispered behind closed doors about the HOA's overreach, were starting to say hello with a little more warmth. I didn't expect gratitude, but I saw a lot of relieved faces. I think the truth was clear to everyone by now. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was slipping. As for me, I had the satisfaction of knowing I didn't just win. I took control of my land, my water supply, and my rights. The ranch was mine, and now I had the power to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again. A week later, I got a call from the county zoning board. Apparently, the HOA was still trying to fight the ruling, but they weren't fighting for the water, they were fighting to save face. Karen had reached out to her contacts, trying to get them to back her up, but there was no getting around the fact that the HOA had violated private property laws. The legal fallout was swift. The county slapped a fine on the HOA for their illegal construction, and they were forced to remove the pipeline that had been illegally buried across my land. But that wasn't all. Karen and the HOA were now officially under investigation for the fraudulent way they tried to seize my property through eminent domain. The paperwork she'd filed with the county had been riddled with inaccuracies, proof that they were hoping I wouldn't notice. Then came the big one, the water contract. The previous owner of the well system had made sure that the HOA's access to the water was limited by a specific contract. Once that expired, the HOA had no legal right to continue using it. The county ruled in my favor, and the HOA was forced to pay me for water rights at market value, no less. The real kicker came a month later. I was sitting on the porch enjoying a quiet evening when a car pulled up. It was Karen standing by her SUV, clutching an envelope in her hands. She didn't look me in the eye as she walked up the driveway, and I knew what this was about. She handed me the envelope without saying a word. I opened it, and there it was, the check for the first month's payment for water rights. It was a lot more than I expected, enough to make me smile. She stood there, her arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know what to say," she muttered. "We didn't know how much it would cost to fix this." I looked at her, making sure she knew I wasn't going to make this easy. "Well, you've got a long way to go before I'd even consider this fair." She nodded stiffly. "I'm sorry, Derek, for everything. The HOA. I was just trying to help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help? By stealing my land?" She looked down at the ground, clearly broken. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm sorry." I paused, letting the silence stretch. It wasn't often that someone like Karen apologized, at least not without being forced into it. But seeing her stand there humbled was almost satisfying. She had tried to tear down my world, but she had built her own undoing. "I'll take the check," I said, handing it to her. "But don't expect me to forget how this went down." She nodded, then turned away, her steps heavy, as she got back in her car and drove off, the sound of her tires crunching on the gravel echoing behind her. A few weeks after that, the HOA board dissolved under pressure. Members resigned, including Karen, who was quietly retired. I heard whispers around town that her actions had cost her more than just her position. Her reputation was in tatters. The community had lost trust in her, and that was a price no amount of apologies could fix. As for me, my ranch was thriving. The well was running smoothly, and the pipeline I once feared was now a source of steady income. The HOA paid me every month for water rights, and with each check, Karen had to sign her name. I'd never seen someone so uncomfortable writing a check before, but I wasn't about to make it easy for her. My land was mine, my rights were respected, and Cedar Creek Estates was just a little bit quieter now. The HOA had learned the hard way there was a price to pay when you mess with the wrong person, and in the end, I walked away with a victory that was worth more than any paycheck piece. Funny how things turn out when you know your rights and your land.